Welcome back to the morning show here on the Raj News. Joining us now to take a look at the news stories making headlines around the globe is the Raj News correspondent, Aron Akerejola. Hello, Aaron. What's up in the news this morning?
Hi, Aaron.
Good morning. Good morning. It's good to be here today.
Good to see you.
Yes, let's start it off from the meeting that actually was held in Abuja yesterday here in Nigeria. I'd like to tell you the Nigerian governors met in Abuja on Tuesday night and said that they can only increase workers' salary in the states from 18,000 naira to 25,500 per month. The resolve of the governors was contrary to the demand of the Nigerian Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress that the minimum wage must be increased to 30,000 naira. The federal government had earlier offered a pay of 24,000 naira as minimum wage. However, Labour declared that it would order workers to go on strike from the 6th of November if the government refused to take decisive action on its demand. So,
well, the thing to note here, I mean, was it really 25,500 that was offered or 22,500?
22,500.
I think it's 22,500. The other thing to note is that when we discussed this subject yesterday, we noted that the governors said every governor must be in attendance.
True.
But that didn't happen. However, what is to be underscored is the fact that they consider the issue important enough. Before now, the governors were recalcitrant. They said they could only offer 20,000 naira as the minimum wage. Now the governors have shifted position. But in terms of completeness, Labour boycotted our meeting. So it wasn't the kind of tripartite meeting that we would have expected. The governors are basing their position on the explanation that they can only pay what they can afford. So they have moved from 20,000 naira to 22,000 naira to 22,000 naira 500.
Yes.
And they are quoting Section 3 of the National Salaries and Wages Commission Act, saying that, look, you can only pay what you can afford. But what is interesting here is that Labour immediately rejected the offer. And Labour says it's still going ahead with the strike that is planned for November 6th. So Labour is still mobilizing workers to go on strike. So we should be worried about the implications of the outcome, the decision, and the fallout. It's like Labour it's not willing, to shift its position. And if that is the case, it means that by next week, we could have a situation in which Nigeria is shut down and we have a labor crisis on our hands.
Also remember that Labour is coming from about 60,000 naira, which they initially asked for, and they had shifted grounds to 30,000 naira when the federal government said they were going to pay 25,000 or 24,000, and then the governor said they could pay 20,000. But looking at this figure on the table, this is just 2,500 naira away from 18,000 naira that already exists. Is that enough to make Labour want to shift grounds at any cost? I'm not sure. If we've been on 18,000 naira for years,
4,500.
My maths is wrong. Well, 4,500 naira is I don't know who would want to shift grounds from 60,000 naira. And then you're offering just 4,500 naira additional to 18,000 naira national minimum wage. When we look at the cost of living has increased, I mean, moving from point A to point B has not remained the same for years, and then all you have to offer is 4,500 naira. I think that this is a battle that Labour seeks to win, and if that happens, then the country might be bearing the brunt for these two parties who do not seem like this is going to end anytime soon.
All right. Although the silver lining in this particular dark cloud is the fact that the governor of the state, Governor Obaseki, is saying that he doesn't have a problem paying that 30,000. As a matter of fact, he says he's already paying 24,000 to his workers already. So he assured the people before he left for Abuja yesterday that, don't worry, you guys can relax. So now the question is, will those people in those states join the rest of the nation to shut down the nation, literally?
Well, that's what it should be. I mean, ordinarily, in a federal system,
yes,
minimum wage should not be centrally negotiated.
True.
Each state, each region should pay according to, what it can afford.
Yes.
But it just happened that in Nigeria, we have abused the federal system,
True.
and everything has to be dictated
From the center.
From the center.
True.
So if Edo State says they can pay, then of course that's fine.
He said they're already paying, and they said they will even pay 30,000. He said, don't worry, we'll just go in there for formalities.
Yeah, that differentiation will be in accord with the principle of federalism.
True talk.
But we keep paying the price for our disrespect, for the principle of federalism.
True.
And this confronts Nigeria again with a major issue. But I think that organized labor has been very strategic.
Yes.
However, I think that government is also trying to make an attempt to divide labor, because you see that NASIMA, the Chamber of Commerce organization, disassociated itself from labor. And politically, when you look at that, you see that the Nigerian government is trying to adopt a divide and rule strategy. But on the long run, I don't see how that can help. And on November 6th, we'll see the extent to which organized labor has been able to mobilize the Nigerian people. I'm sure you want more money.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. But we always say more money, but the rise of inflation and the what they call it, the windfall of that is another thing that we should also
that's
actually
the
put into
technical side
context.
of it.
We have to put into context.
I've argued about wage indexation here and elsewhere. That when you do wage indexation, the effect may really be completely marginal.
True.
But the position of labor, when we invited Issa Remo onto this program, who is a trustee of the Nigerian Labour Congress, his argument is that, look, this is a statutory thing, really, according to International Labour Organization principles and regulations, that periodically you have to review the minimum wage.
Okay.
So it's not as if labor, according to him, is asking for anything extraordinary.
True talk. All right, still in Nigeria, let's tell you that the police say they have arrested 400 members of the Islamic movement in Nigeria, the IMN, during the violent protests in Abuja on Tuesday. The Federal Capital Territory Police Commissioner also said that 31 bottles of petrol bomb were recovered from the IMN members during the clash which occurred in Wuse area of Abuja. A police patrol vehicle was burned during the outbreak of violence, the third of its kind within the nation's capital in the last 72 hours. According to the commissioner, 2 of the protesters were arrested while attempting to smuggle petrol bombs into the city. He identified them as Mustafa Abdullahi, arrested with a bag containing 18 bottles of the bombs, and Abdullahi Umar, arrested with a bag containing 13 of them. That's probably your action, that were there proofs and were there evidences that these people were actually engaging in violence, and probably that's the commissioner saying that. Here you have it, the bottles of petrol bombs.
Yeah, yesterday I raised that question.
Yes.
That the military authorities, the spokesperson of the Nigerian army, said, they had to start shooting following acts of provocation on the part of the Shiites, and that the military shooting some of them was a case of self-defense. And I said, well, we didn't have the evidence. But what has happened is that this has gone on for about 3 days.
Yes.
The Shiites, they went back to Abuja after that initial confrontation with the military and the police. And this time, they didn't adopt their usual strategy of trekking. They got into Abuja, through buses. And then they engaged the police in a confrontation, burned down a police van. They came, as has been reported, with petrol bombs. They came with stones. And all of this has been reported on social media. Now, 2 things. First, we must reiterate the right of individuals to protest.
True.
2, the right of individuals to associate, the freedom of association. 3, the right to the freedom of thought. Now, when that is violated, oftentimes, you can trigger a reaction that you do not expect. So I do not buy into the narrative that the Shiites in Nigeria are originally criminal. I believe that what has happened is that they are responding to how they have been treated by the Nigerian state. First, the continued incarceration of their leader, Ibrahim Zakzaki, without due recourse, due respect for the court ruling that has advised the Nigerian government to free him. Now, beyond all of that, I also raised the question yesterday whether, the military is in the proper position to do police duties. So what I see here is a failure of the Nigerian government to manage the conflict well, to manage the crisis well, and to go beyond managing crisis to religious partisanship and to, the violation of certain fundamental rights. So the criminal, the resort to a criminal option by those protesters, I think, was triggered by the failure of the state to manage the crisis well. Now, these Shiites, they say they are protesting over the continued incarceration of their leader, Ibrahim Zakzaki. But there's also an international dimension to this, which I tried to explain yesterday. And it is as follows. The protest about Zakzaki is coming at a time when in Iraq, there's a pilgrimage. The pilgrimage that comes annually after 40 days of the mourning of Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you have in Iraq, right, that movement, and the Iraqis are even claiming that, look, the pilgrimage that they have at this moment, in the last 2 days, is even more than whatever you have in the pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia, okay? So, and the Shiites, they are pro-Iraq, pro-Iran, pro-Palestine, anti-Israel. So, it has implications for national security. So our National Intelligence Agency, the Department of State Security, they need to look at what is happening much deeper in terms of the security implications for Abuja and for Nigeria.
True.
And at a time when we are having an election, we're going into an election, I think it's important for our security and intelligence experts to look beyond the surface to see whether there's some kind of attempt to compromise the security integrity of Abuja or of the entire country itself, and to see how they do not go into a war, using that in quotes, or low-level insurgency in the Federal Capital Territory that could have implications for everything else going forward in Nigeria.
For me, I have, like you've rightly said, Ruben, no doubt the government has mismanaged this entire situation. This comes at a time when President Muhammad Buhari goes to Kaduna State to calm frayed nerves and is reassuring that peace will return. The clashes have been for 3 consecutive days in the city of power, Abuja, and no statement has been made by the president. They have been numb. Secondly, for me, is the peace and the economic activities that have to be grounded. I got messages from people in Wuse 2 yesterday who said they had to be locked in their houses, they had to be locked in their offices, and not just that. They're also receiving some of the tear gas that are used to disperse the protesters. Now, Ruben has been part of the presidency in the past. I don't know how this works, but do you think that a statement by the presidency or the silence we are seeing could speak something to this protest we are witnessing?
Well, I mean, the presidency can issue a statement. The best that they can do is to deplore, any kind of violation of public peace and order in the Federal Capital Territory. But more than that, you have the Brigade of Guards. The responsibility of the Brigade of Guards is to protect the integrity of the Federal Capital Territory and the presidency. And the Brigade of Guards have been part of this. Their job is to make sure that Abuja is protected. And they have spoken up. They have said, look, they have a duty to do this. You have the Department of State Security, which is also in Abuja. Because of the international dimension of this particular matter, I was referring to the Arabin, in Iraq, which is a festival, an annual festival. I think that the National Intelligence Agency also has a job to do a proper analysis, to advise the president, and to make sure that there is security. But more than that, the residual issue of Ibrahim Zakzaki being held, since 2016,
yes,
for about 2 years, just like that. And the insinuation that at a certain level in the Nigerian government, that Sunni Muslims within the government are using the instruments of state to fight a battle of faith, personal battles, if you like, And maybe, there are policemen, there are soldiers who are also Sunnis, who do not like the Shiites, and then using the coercive instruments of power to escalate the conflict. So it's important for government to address that and to make sure that while defending, the security of the state, the integrity, the sovereign integrity of Nigeria, do not allow a situation whereby you cause a religious war.
Exactly.
Which could be intra-religious war. Because oftentimes we talk about inter-religious war, we talk about Christians and Muslims fighting. But what the Shiite problem in Nigeria points attention to is the fact that there could be even intra-religious conflict, which could be fed into the state apparatus and state relations with non-state actors and create problems. That is where the dilemma, in my view, lies.
Right. Let's actually move on to the U.S. and tell you that President Donald Trump says that he plans to end birthright citizenship in the U.S. by executive order. In an interview, President Trump claimed that he was working on an end to the birthright citizenship, the 150-year-old principle that says anyone born on the U.S. soil is an American citizen. The president is quoted as saying, "It was always told to me that you needed a constitutional amendment. Guess what? You don't. You can definitely do it with an act of Congress. But now they are saying I can do it just with an executive order," end of quote. His comments have ignited a furious debate about whether or not the president has the unilateral power to do such a thing, and whether the underlying premise that the birthright citizenship is exploited by undocumented immigrants has any merits.
I don't know who the people speaking to President Trump are. He didn't specify. He just said, they told me.
Yeah, his legal team. His legal team have been speaking to him, and they've told him that he can actually exploit that particular option without going through Congress.
Some people think that this is just part of his immigration rhetoric 1 week before the midterm elections, because a lot of people think that he has not been able to unite the country in recent times. It was a week of terror for the U.S., from the pipe bombs to the synagogue killing, there was another killing. I can't remember the states now, but those three incidents, a lot of people thought that the president couldn't unite the country, and going into the elections, that could cause his party. So they feel like this is just another rhetoric. However, we have seen some of this rhetoric he has been pushing come to pass. The anti-Muslim entry into the U.S., for some Muslim countries to enter into the U.S. These were also some of his campaign promises to the American people that went to the polls. So it's left to be seen.
It's a little bit different. It's a little bit different.
You think so?
Because
no, I think first, this is part of the midterm election rhetoric. President Trump imagines that one of the strong points that he had when he came to power was because he was anti-immigration. And he probably has been advised that, as the country goes to the midterm Congress elections, if he pushes up the anti-immigration rhetoric, it will happen. And you know that before this, there's been that rhetoric about the people coming from Venezuela, the wave of the migrants heading towards the United States from Ecuador, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Honduras, Mexico. And at first he sent 500 federal troops. That has been increased to 5,200, federal troops, with some Americans complaining about the abuse of the military. But here I think he's in troubled waters. I think that, this is a matter that will go all the way to the Supreme Court, because it touches certain fundamental issues in the American Constitution. Let's start with the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution abolished slavery and recognized the right of African Americans to be citizens. They had been slaves, but they were born, their parents were non-citizens. They were brought as slaves, but they were born there. And it says, you have become citizens with that 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment went a step further, to consolidate and say, look, if you are born on American soil, right, then you are automatically an American citizen. It's called the right of the soil doctrine. You have it in Canada, where this issue has also been controversial, and it's also been debated. You have it in Malaysia. You have it in Lesotho. Okay? So what is going to happen is that the president says executive order. Executive order is largely an administrative tool. So you are likely to have persons who will go to court and say, well, what does this mean in real terms?
But even looking at it closely, because they said the members of his own party are even against it.
The speaker has spoken out.
Paul Ryan has actually spoken against it vehemently. I said that's not even possible. That, like you mentioned, the 14th Amendment dating back to that particular Supreme Court 1898, where one...
1858.
Okay, 58, where one could actually...
The Scott case.
Yes.
It's called the Scott case.
Yes, and
then later you have the Wong Kima.
Yeah, the Wong, I'm talking about the Wong's case in 1898, whereby they actually went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that a man that was born, even though his parents were not American, provided he was born in America, is an American citizen. And I think it actually covers all those immigrants that he was also referring to. So looking at all this, putting it in context, the truth, in all sincerity, it might be a rhetoric, but Donald Trump knows that it's not going to fly in America, because if his own party members, if the whole legislation is actually against him and is still insisting that an executive order, when he knows that for it to actually pull through, you need to go to Congress, and even the Congress members are saying, listen, this cannot fly. I think he's just...
I don't think it will go through Congress.
If it's going to use an executive order,
you will have to take it through Congress to get the approval, the appropriate approval. No, he cannot do it on his own. But even then, what we see here under Trump, more than any other American president, is this tension between, American protectionism, isolationism, and America's expansionism. Although that expansionism does not extend to colonialism.
True.
So it's a tension that is always there in American foreign policy. And this is the case because you have the Republicans in power. And, Donald Trump is not going to be in charge of America forever. Yes. So some of these policies that he has introduced will be reversed, I believe, when you have another ideological bloc in power that seeks to reach out more to the world.
And it also affects the narrative, because they've been trying to change the narrative, the Republicans, ahead of the midterm election, and Donald Trump. They're trying to change the narrative that the reason why there are more frequent spits of violence in America, with the pipe bombs, with the killings that we've been seeing over the last 3-4 days, is because of Donald Trump actually hitting up all these immigration politicians.
That happened when President Trump and Melania Trump and Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump visited Pittsburgh, the scene of the Tree of Life synagogue.
Yes.
When they visited, there was a protest. They were not welcome. People were saying, look, more or less that Trump, you caused this with your hate speech.
And this further just validates that particular statement that Trump is out to, because even the mayor was saying that he wasn't aware that Donald Trump was coming to.
He didn't go.
No, he advised him not to come. Not to come.
And despite the cause, he decided to go ahead.
Yeah.
Really, really sad. Okay.
But again, it was being presidential.
Because there are those who would have criticized him if he didn't go anyways.
No, he was in fact criticized because he went on a campaign trip the following day, and then there was a lot of criticism. So he was under an obligation, of course, to show up there.
Yes.
And he went there, but the people were not impressed. But I hope, of course, that the proper lessons have been learned, and that leaders in developing countries who are watching all of this would also learn, right? Because if it were in Africa, the president may not even bother.
And nobody would better, and nothing would happen.
Unfortunately, we have to go. Many thanks, Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right.
For the headlines. And that's all on the news headlines. We'll take a short break now.